The night my wife's lungs betrayed her, the sound of sirens should have been salvation. Instead, it became the opening note of a nightmare. Flashing red lights painted the walls of our gated community, but the ambulance didn't move. It sat trapped at the iron gate, an unmoving barrier between my disabled wife and the oxygen she desperately needed. And there she was, Karen. Arms crossed, chin high, barking at the EMTs. No unauthorized vehicles after 10 o'clock. Rules are rules. As my wife gasped for breath inside, this woman cared more about bylaws than human life. What she didn't know, what no one in that HOA meeting ever suspected, was that I wasn't just some quiet homeowner. I had the power to bring her entire empire of pettiness crashing down, and before the night was over, she would be in tears. Before we dive in, drop a comment below with your city and local time. I love seeing where my listeners are tuning in from around the world. I used to think of our neighborhood as a place of peace. Gated, manicured lawns, hedges cut with military precision, and a board of directors who acted like they ran the Pentagon. To outsiders, it was the American dream packaged in stucco and asphalt. But inside, anyone who lived here long enough knew it came with a catch. Our HOA didn't just govern, it ruled. And at the head of that rule was Karen, HOA president, self-appointed guardian of community standards. She wasn't elected because she was kind or competent. She was elected because she had the loudest voice and the sharpest tongue. Imagine a cross between a middle school hall monitor and a tax auditor, then give her a clipboard with unlimited fines. That was Karen. I'd had my share of run-ins with her before. My wife, bless her, has been disabled since a car accident years ago. She moves around with a wheelchair and depends on an oxygen concentrator at home. When we moved into this neighborhood, I thought the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, would shield us from harassment. I was wrong. Karen came after us almost immediately. She fined us because the wheelchair ramp disrupted the architectural harmony of the block. She threatened to sue because the medical supply van parked outside our house wasn't registered as a vendor. She even had the audacity to tell me to repaint the front door because the color we chose was too hospital-like. It wasn't just us either. Karen spread misery like fertilizer. Mr. Alvarez across the street got fined for his grandson's skateboard ramp. Priya, a young mother 2 houses down, got cited because her stroller left tire marks on the sidewalk. But the difference between them and us was that my wife's needs weren't optional. Her health wasn't some hobby Karen could vote on. The breaking point came last spring when the HOA passed a noise abatement rule. It banned sirens after 10 p.m. unless pre-approved by the board. Pre-approved. As if heart attacks, strokes, or respiratory crises scheduled themselves like dentist appointments. When I challenged it, Karen smirked. Emergencies are rare. We just want to preserve the tranquility of our neighborhood. You understand, don't you? I didn't answer. I knew better than to waste breath arguing with a woman who treated empathy like it was against regulations, but inside, I filed it away. I knew someday rules that stupid would have a price. Around that time, I started preparing. I'd already worked most of my life in civil service law compliance oversight. I understood that paper trails were sharper than swords. I quietly requested access codes for emergency vehicles at our gate. Denied. I filed a formal request for installation of a Knox box, a fire department override box for emergencies. Denied. Karen said it would attract vandalism. So I went around her. I spoke to the county fire marshal, who confirmed what I already suspected: the HOA had ignored multiple warnings to upgrade the gate system. They'd cut corners on maintenance, lied about compliance, and pocketed fees by funneling contracts to Karen's nephew's so-called security company. But here's the thing, I wasn't ready to go nuclear yet. My wife needed peace more than I needed victory. Every day she smiled at me and I could see she was tired. Tired of fighting battles she never asked for. So I played it quiet, biding my time. Let Karen think she'd won. And then came the night of the sirens. That evening had been normal, almost boring. My wife and I had been watching an old movie we liked, the classics. She laughed at the cheesy dialogue, though halfway through I noticed her breathing was shallower than usual. I asked if she was okay. She nodded, told me not to fuss, but I knew better. Her condition could swing from stable to critical in minutes. By 9:30 she was struggling. I checked her oxygen tank half full. She usually managed fine, but something was off. I adjusted the flow, called her doctor, and got told to head straight to the ER. At 10 sharp her chest tightened. Her lips started to pale. I didn't waste a second. I called 911. The dispatcher's calm voice guided me through the steps while paramedics rushed to us. I pulled out the emergency bag, prepped the portable oxygen, and tried to keep my wife awake. Every second dragged like an hour. Finally I heard it, the sound of salvation. Sirens in the distance growing louder, red lights flashing against the living room window. Relief washed over me. They were here. We were safe. But then I realized something was wrong. The lights weren't moving. They stayed fixed at the same spot. I stepped outside and looked down the street. The ambulance was parked at the gate. The paramedics were out of the vehicle, shouting at the guard booth, waving their arms in frustration. And there, standing squarely in front of them like she was defending the Berlin Wall, was Karen. Clipboard in one hand, phone in the other, lips pursed like she was savoring the power of this moment. My heart dropped into my stomach. My wife was gasping for air inside, and the one person who could open that gate was treating this like a board meeting. That's when I realized the HOA wasn't just a nuisance anymore. It was a threat. And if Karen thought for 1 second that I was going to let her bylaws bury my wife, she had no idea who she was dealing with. I don't think people who have never watched a loved one gasp for breath can understand how terrifying silence becomes. Every second that passed, every weak inhale from my wife, was like a countdown clock echoing in my head. And out there at the gate, precious minutes were bleeding away. I bolted back inside, checked the monitor. Her oxygen saturation was plummeting 908783. I tightened the mask, adjusted the flow rate, and prayed the portable unit would buy us enough time. "Hang on, honey," I whispered, trying to steady my own voice. She looked up at me with those tired eyes that had already endured too many battles. I forced a smile, but inside I was shaking. Then I sprinted back outside. The night air was thick with flashing lights. Red and blue strobed across the neat, quiet cul-de-sac, washing over mailboxes and manicured hedges that suddenly looked grotesque in their perfection. The ambulance crew, Nina and Derek the first, would learn their names later, were at the gate pounding on the steel. Their voices carried across the still night. "Open the gate, emergency response," Nina shouted. She held up her radio, speaking into it, then slammed her hand against the keypad. Why isn't this override working? Inside the booth, guard Todd sat frozen like a deer in headlights. He was a part-time college kid, barely 20, hired to check IDs and wave through Amazon deliveries. Now, with 2 EMTs screaming at him and a clipboard queen barking orders at his shoulder, he looked like he'd rather vanish into the concrete. Karen, meanwhile, was in her element. She blocked the gate with her body arms crossed, voice sharp and self-satisfied. "You can't just come barging in here without authorization. Do you have a permit?" "This is private property," Derek snapped back. "Ma'am, this is a medical emergency. We have a patient in respiratory distress." "The law requires immediate access," Karen sneered. "The law requires respect for community bylaws. This gate is for residents and approved vendors only. You should be at the service entrance." I wanted to laugh. Service entrance. At midnight, did she expect the ambulance to take a scenic detour while my wife suffocated, but the bile in my throat wouldn't let me laugh. Instead, I stormed forward. "She's dying in there," I roared, pointing toward our house. "Open the damn gate before you kill her." Karen turned that icy glare on me. "Sir, control yourself. You're escalating the situation. If you continue to harass me or this guard, I'll call the police." "The police," I shot back. "Great, let's add more sirens to your noise complaint. Maybe they'll bring a marching band while we wait." The crowd was growing. Neighbors roused by the sirens peeked from their porches, some clutching robes, some holding phones aloft to record. Mr. Alvarez limped over muttering curses in Spanish. Priya held her baby close, eyes wide with outrage. Whispers rippled. "What's happening? Why won't they open the gate?" Inside the ambulance, Nina tried the radio again. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. We're locked out of gated property. Patient inside is critical. Requesting immediate backup." Static crackled, then a calm voice. "Copy that, Unit 12. County fire en route." But I knew every extra unit meant more time lost. And time was the one thing we didn't have. I leaned into the booth, staring down Todd. "Listen to me, son. You are not liable for opening this gate in a medical emergency. You are liable if you don't. Do you want someone's death on your conscience tonight?" Todd's Adam's apple bobbed. His hand hovered near the switch. Then Karen snapped her fingers in front of his face. "Don't you dare! The board will fine you and your company will terminate your contract. You follow my orders." That was Karen's favorite word, orders. She liked to pretend the HOA was a branch of the military and she was the commanding officer. But what she didn't realize was that this wasn't a battlefield she could control. This was life or death. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "You are obstructing emergency medical services. That's a felony in this state. Every second you waste will be written in a police report and read aloud in a courtroom. Is that the legacy you want?" She didn't flinch. Instead, she pulled out her phone and started filming. threatening an HOA officer. "Everyone, you're my witnesses. This man is dangerous. Dangerous." That word rang in my ears. I wasn't the one choking the life out of a woman with a stopwatch of rules. Behind us, my wife's portable alarm beeped a sharp, panicked chirp that carried from inside the house. Even from a distance, I knew what it meant. Her saturation had dropped below safe limits. My stomach lurched. "Move," I bellowed. I grabbed the gate myself, rattling the bars, but it didn't budge. Solid steel. Nina joined me, her face tense with fury. "We can't wait. If she codes, she won't make it. We need access now." Derek was already hauling equipment out of the ambulance: intubation kit, portable ventilator, backup, oxygen. They were preparing to treat her in the driveway, but without rapid transport, it was just buying time. 9 minutes. That's all it had been since I dialed 911. 9 minutes that stretched into eternity. 9 minutes in which my wife's life was weighed against a clipboard and a set of bylaws. Karen lifted her chin higher, savoring the standoff. "Rules are rules," she repeated. "If we let you break them once, chaos follows." I stared at her, my hands shaking, not with fear but with rage. "Chaos," I said. "No, Karen. Chaos is letting a woman die because you can't see past your own ego." The crowd murmured louder. "Mister," Alvarez shouted, "open the gate, for God's sake." Priya's voice cracked. She's a human being, but Karen didn't move. And in that frozen moment, sirens wailing, alarms chirping, neighbors shouting, I realized this was no longer just about my wife. It was about everyone who had ever been crushed under the weight of people like her. People who mistook power for morality. People who thought authority was more important than humanity. The storm was building. And Karen had no idea that by refusing to open that gate, she had just unlocked something far more dangerous: me. Karen planted her feet like she was the last line of defense at some holy fortress, when in reality she was just blocking an ambulance from doing its job. Her SUV was angled diagonally across the entry lane, headlights off, hazard lights blinking in a smug rhythm that matched her tone. "This gate has a vendor lane," she announced, waving her clipboard as though it were scripture. "Emergency vehicles are required to pre-register with the HOA to use the front entrance. That is policy." Derek dropped his intubation kit onto the asphalt and spun toward her. "Pre-register? What do you want us to do? Schedule heart attacks? Give you a calendar of strokes?" His voice cracked under the weight of disbelief. Karen sniffed. "If we start allowing exceptions, then everyone will think rules are optional. We cannot allow chaos." Chaos. There it was again. Meanwhile, inside my home, my wife was fighting for every shallow breath, and this woman was worried about an HOA's imaginary apocalypse. I stepped forward, trying to keep my voice from exploding into a scream. "My wife's blood oxygen is dropping by the second. If she goes into cardiac arrest, those paramedics will need to get her to the ER immediately." "Do you understand what's at stake here?" Karen pursed her lips. "I understand. The board has empowered me to enforce our bylaws. If you have a complaint, you can file it at the next monthly meeting." The absurdity of her words nearly knocked me over. File it at the next meeting. My wife didn't have minutes left, let alone 30 days. The crowd swelled as more neighbors arrived. Mr. Alvarez edged closer, his cane clacking against the pavement. "Senora, open the gate before I break it myself," he growled. Karen shot him a glare. "Touch this property, and you'll be fined $5,000. The tension was unbearable. Nina glanced at Derek, then back at me. "We can treat her inside until backup arrives, but without transport her chances." She trailed off. I could see the calculation behind her eyes, the brutal math of survival. I turned to Todd, the guard, who was practically sinking into his chair. His eyes darted between me and Karen, his hand hovering near the switch that could end this nightmare. "Todd, listen to me," I said, lowering my tone. "This is your chance to be on the right side of history. Open that gate. Do it now." Karen slapped her hand down on his armrest. "Don't you dare. The liability falls on you if you disobey me." "Liability?" I barked. "No, the liability is on you, Karen. You're obstructing emergency medical services. That's not just immoral, it's illegal. You're writing your own criminal record in real time." For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed her face. But it was fleeting. She raised her phone higher, angling it toward the flashing lights. "I'm documenting everything. This will go straight to the board, and if anyone touches this gate, I'll sue for damages." The arrogance in her voice made the crowd hiss and mutter. Priya shouted, "Damages? What about the damage you're doing to a human life?" Others nodded, their anger boiling over. Derek threw his hands up. "I've had enough of this. Dispatch this as Unit 12. We need fire on scene to breach the gate." Immediate authorization to cut through. Karen spun on him. "Absolutely not. You'll destroy HOA property." "HOA property," I echoed. My laugh was cold hollow. That's what you're worried about, paint and steel. While a woman inside is dying, the paramedic ignored her protests and returned to prepping equipment. He snapped open a ventilator, his hands steady despite the chaos. Nina grabbed a backup oxygen cylinder and shot me a look that said, "Keep buying us time." I did. "Karen," I said, stepping closer, my voice dropping to a calm I didn't actually feel. "Do you realize that obstructing emergency personnel is punishable under state law? Do you realize that the ADA requires full, unimpeded access for disabled residents in crisis? Do you realize you're personally liable for every breath she misses because of this delay?" She smirked. "The board will indemnify me. I have immunity." I shook my head slowly, almost pitying her ignorance. Boards can't indemnify intentional harm. This isn't immunity, Karen. This is negligence. This is cruelty. And the law doesn't look kindly on cruelty. Her smirk faltered just slightly. Behind us, the portable alarm inside my house screamed again, a long, shrill tone that made my blood run cold. That sound meant her levels had fallen into the red zone. I could almost feel her fading. Mr. Alvarez suddenly moved forward, gripping his cane like a crowbar. "Enough talk," he muttered. He wedged it under the edge of the gate, straining with what little strength his 70-year-old frame had left. The steel groaned but held. Karen shrieked, "Stop that! You'll be fined!" The crowd erupted into shouts. Neighbors who'd spent years cowering under Karen's fines finally snapped. They surged forward, pressing against the gate, yelling for it to be opened. The HOA president's grip on power was cracking, but still the barrier stood. I pulled out my phone and dialed directly to the county fire battalion chief. The line buzzed twice before a deep, authoritative voice answered. "Chief Ramsey, this is narrator's name," I said. "We have an ambulance blocked at the Oaks Gate HOA. My wife is coding. I'm requesting immediate breach authorization." There was no hesitation. "Copy that. Rescue team is inbound. We'll cut it open." Karen's eyes went wide. "You wouldn't dare. That gate cost," I cut her off. "More than a life. Prove it." She slammed her SUV into park and stood in front of it, arms outstretched like she could physically stop the inevitable. Over my dead body, she hissed. For the first time that night, I felt a strange calm wash over me, because now I knew she had just declared war on the wrong man. And the war was about to end, not with her victory, but with her humiliation. The alarm inside my house shrieked again, a piercing mechanical scream that cut through the chaos like a knife. I could almost hear my wife's lungs begging for relief. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to focus. I knew if I let panic take over, I'd lose the only weapon I had left, my mind. Karen was shouting now, her voice hoarse but defiant. "This is private property. If you break that gate, every one of you will be sued." She spun in a circle, pointing at neighbors, at paramedics, at me, her finger trembling like a blade. "And you're the ringleader of this anarchy." Anarchy. That word almost made me laugh. I glanced around at the scene, EMTs sweating under flashing lights, an old man with a cane bracing against steel, a mother holding her crying baby, and a community choking under rules written in ink but enforced in arrogance. This wasn't anarchy. This was survival. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so that it cut through her hysteria. "Karen, listen to me carefully. Right now, you are committing obstruction of emergency medical services. Under state law, that's a felony. If my wife dies tonight, that charge becomes criminally negligent homicide. No board, no bylaw, no fine will save you from that." For the first time, her face flickered with doubt. But then she straightened, clinging to her fortress of arrogance. "The HOA will back me. The insurance covers the board." I shook my head slowly, deliberately. Insurance doesn't cover willful misconduct, and no jury in the world will see what you're doing as anything less than cruelty. She faltered just a fraction, then barked at Todd. "Don't touch that switch. If you open that gate, you'll be personally liable. You'll lose your job, your future." The young guard's hands shook so badly the flashlight rattled on the counter. He looked like a boy caught between a mother and a father, screaming in his ears. Sweat dripped down his temple. He whispered, "I don't know what to do." I locked eyes with him. "Do the right thing. You will not be punished for saving a life. You will be punished for letting one slip away. Choose wisely." He hesitated, his hand hovering over the release. But Karen slammed her palm against the console, blocking him. "Don't you dare," she screeched. That's when I changed tactics. "Fine," I said, turning to the paramedics. "We escalate." Derek nodded, grimly pulling his radio close. "Dispatch Unit 12, requesting immediate sheriff presence. Gate obstruction, hostile civilian, life-threatening emergency." The dispatcher's reply crackled, "Copy Unit 12. Sheriff units en route ETA, 6 minutes, 6 minutes." An eternity, when oxygen was running out second by second, Nina ripped open the portable ventilator case. She yanked out the tubing connecting it to the cylinder, her hands moving with mechanical precision. "We're going to have to stabilize her in the driveway," she muttered, though her eyes screamed the truth. Stabilization was a bandage, not a cure. I turned back to Karen. 6 minutes until law enforcement arrives. "When they do, you'll be arrested on the spot." Her face reddened. "Arrested for protecting property. Don't be ridiculous." I leaned in close, my voice steady, almost surgical. "You are not protecting property. You are endangering human life. That is the difference between order and tyranny." The crowd cheered softly at that, neighbors emboldened by words they'd never dared say out loud. Mr. Alvarez slammed his cane against the pavement. "Ya basta, enough." Priya's baby wailed, her mother's voice breaking as she pleaded, "Please let them through." But Karen didn't budge. She doubled down like tyrants always do when they feel power slipping through their fingers. She whipped out her phone, dialing furiously. "Board members, yes, it's Karen. We have a situation. Residents are rioting, an ambulance is trespassing. I need authorization to—" I cut her off with a bitter laugh. "Authorization? You think a conference call will outvote biology? Oxygen doesn't wait for quorums, Karen." Her voice trembled with rage. "You don't scare me." "Good," I said, stepping closer, my eyes locked on hers. "Because fear isn't the goal. Truth Island. And here's the truth, you're about to lose everything you think you control." Behind us, a siren wailed closer, different from the ambulance, deeper, heavier. County fire was arriving. My chest tightened with relief, but also with dread. If they had to cut the gate, precious minutes would still vanish. I turned back to Derek. "How long can she hold on?" He grimaced. "Not long. Maybe 3-4 minutes without transport." 3 minutes. My pulse hammered in my ears. Then, the unthinkable happened. Karen's SUV, still blocking the lane, suddenly roared to life. She slammed it into park again, leaving it as a barricade, then stepped out, arms spread wide. Over my body, she shrieked. The fire truck pulled up, men in heavy gear spilling out with cutting tools. Their captain strode forward, barking orders. "We're breaching." Karen threw herself in front of them. "This is HOA property. I forbid you." The captain didn't even blink. "Ma'am, step aside. Now." She planted her feet. No, I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped between her and the firefighters, my voice rising above the din. "If you want to stand in front of steel and fire, then be my guest. But when those cutters spark, it won't just be the gate burning down, it'll be your entire reign." She froze. Her bravado cracked, replaced by a flicker of fear. The crowd roared with approval. Neighbors finally emboldened after years of silence. Cameras caught every second. And as the fire captain signaled his men to begin, I knew the tipping point had come. Karen wasn't just facing me anymore. She was facing the law. And when the law showed up, it didn't come with clipboards. It came with sirens, uniforms, and consequences. The hiss of hydraulic tools filled the night, a harsh metallic scream, as the fire crew prepared to slice through the steel gate. Sparks danced off the grinder, tiny meteors bursting against the cold iron. Neighbors gasped, phones raised high, recording every angle of Karen's empire crumbling in real time. She screamed above the noise, voice cracking. "You can't do this, I forbid it. I'm the HOA president." The fire captain didn't even look at her. "Lady, I don't take orders from an HOA. Step aside before you get hurt." But Karen doubled down her heels, digging into the pavement. "This is trespassing. I'll have every one of you arrested. You're destroying community property." That was it. I'd heard enough. I stepped forward past the gawking crowd, past the trembling guard, until I was nose to nose with her. The flashing strobes painted her face in wild colors, red for rage, blue for fear. My voice came out steady, calm, colder than ice. "Karen," I said, "you've played dictator long enough. You've hidden behind bylaws and fines, bullied neighbors, and tonight you crossed the line. You're not just obstructing an ambulance. You're obstructing me." She sneered, spittle catching on her lips. "And who are you exactly? Some cranky homeowner who thinks he can shout louder than me?" I smiled, not wide, not kind, but the kind of smile that comes when a chess player knows the match is already over. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled a leather wallet from my jacket. I flipped it open under the flashing lights. A badge glinted in the chaos. Not the shiny gold of a local cop, not the shield of a county sheriff. This was federal. The seal gleamed United States Department of Justice. The crowd collectively inhaled. Even Todd the guard leaned forward as though gravity itself had shifted. Karen's face drained of color. That's fake," she stammered. I let the silence stretch, then spoke. Deputy Attorney General for Civil Rights, Special Counsel on Emergency Access and ADA Compliance. That's who I am. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. I held her gaze, my voice sharp enough to cut through the air. Do you know what that means? It means I wrote the directive requiring every gated community in this state to provide 24/7 fail-open access for emergency vehicles. It means I've prosecuted HOAs for less than what you're doing right now. And it means if my wife dies tonight, you won't just lose your little clipboard, you'll lose your freedom. Her phone slipped from her hand and clattered to the asphalt. The video she was recording ended abruptly in a burst of static. The fire captain's eyes widened slightly, then he gave me a subtle nod as though to say, "We've got this now." Karen stumbled backward, her voice breaking. You can't just pull rank like this." The board, I snapped. "The board is not above the law. You are not above the law. And the law says human life comes before property. Always." She looked around for support, but the crowd's eyes burned with fury. Even the neighbors who once cowered under her fines now stood united, emboldened by the sight of her unraveling. Alvarez raised his cane like a gavel. "Justice at last," he muttered. The sheriff's cruiser screeched into view, lights flashing. 2 deputies stepped out, hands resting on their belts, surveying the scene with wary eyes. One of them, a broad man with a salt and pepper beard, approached. "What's going on here?" Karen rushed toward him like a drowning woman, grasping for driftwood. "Officer, arrest them. They're destroying property. They're trespassing." The deputy held up a hand. "Ma'am, calm down. Who's in charge here?" I stepped forward, flashing my credentials again. "I am." His eyes flicked to the badge recognition dawning. His posture straightened immediately. "Understood, sir. What are your orders?" Karen's jaw dropped. "Orders? You're listening to him. He's just..." The deputy cut her off. "Ma'am, I suggest you keep quiet before you dig yourself into a deeper hole." Tears welled in Karen's eyes, but they weren't the tears of remorse. They were tears of a tyrant, realizing her crown had just been shattered in public. I turned to the captain. "Cut it." The grinder screamed sparks, showering the asphalt, until with a final metallic groan the gate swung open. The ambulance roared forward, EMTs rushing inside. Nina sprinted past me, ventilator bag pumping in her hands. Derek followed, carrying the intubation kit. I followed them into my home. My wife lay slumped on the couch, lips pale, chest heaving shallowly. The monitor numbers were critical oxygen saturation in the low 60s, pulse erratic. Nina immediately fitted the mask, squeezing the bag rhythmically, while Derek prepped the airway. "Stay with us," Nina urged, her voice tight with urgency. I knelt beside my wife, gripping her hand. Her fingers were icy, but she squeezed weakly, a flicker of life refusing to let go. "You're going to be okay," I whispered. "They're here now. You're safe." Minutes blurred. The EMTs worked with a practiced ballet, securing the tube, inflating her lungs, stabilizing her vitals just enough for transport. The ambulance crew lifted her onto the gurney, rolling her toward the waiting vehicle. I stood towering over Karen, who lingered at the edge of the crowd. Her shoulders sagged, her face streaked with tears. She looked less like a president and more like a child caught with her hand in the cookie jar. "You tried to play gatekeeper with a life," I told her, my voice low but heavy with finality. "And tonight you learned that doors don't close on justice." She sobbed, covering her face with trembling hands. For the first time since I'd met her, she had no words, no bylaws, no fines, just silence. As the ambulance doors slammed shut and the sirens wailed again, I climbed inside beside my wife. Through the window, I caught one last glimpse of Karen crumpling to the curb, her clipboard abandoned at her feet. And I thought to myself, sometimes the strongest punishment isn't jail or fines or lawsuits. Sometimes it's the collapse of a tyrant's illusion broadcast live to everyone she once ruled. The ambulance tore down the boulevard, sirens, wailing red light bouncing off every window pane we passed. Inside, I sat strapped into the bench, gripping my wife's hand while Nina monitored her vitals. Derek worked the ventilator with calm precision. The numbers began to stabilize, oxygen creeping back toward the 70s, then 80s. Relief crashed over me in waves, but the anger beneath it burned hotter than ever. When we reached the ER, a team of doctors swept her away. I stood there hollow, watching the gurney vanish through swinging double doors. Nina touched my arm gently. "She's tough," she said. "She's got a fighting chance." I nodded, unable to speak. My throat felt raw. But I promised myself something in that moment. Karen's reign of terror would end tonight. The next morning I walked into court, not as a grieving husband, not as a victim of a power-hungry HOA president, but as what I truly was, a federal officer with the authority to drag Karen and her board into the light. Within hours, I filed for an emergency injunction against the Oaks Gate HOA. The motion was clear obstruction of emergency medical services, ADA, non-compliance, and systemic negligence that endangered lives. The judge barely needed convincing he signed it before his coffee had cooled. The order suspended the board's power effective immediately and placed the community under temporary receivership until compliance could be guaranteed. By noon, the sheriff's deputies were back at the gates, not to block ambulances this time, but to serve papers. Karen's name was stamped at the top of every page. Word spread like wildfire. Neighbors who once whispered in fear now shouted in fury. Emails leaked internal board correspondence, revealing Karen had ignored repeated warnings from the county fire marshal about the broken Knox box. Worse still, receipts showed her nephew's security company had been billing the HOA thousands for bogus gate repairs. The very system that trapped my wife was a cash cow for her family. When the truth came out, the community erupted. I'll never forget the emergency meeting that night. The clubhouse, usually sterile and half-empty, was packed wall to wall. Residents who'd endured years of her tyranny filled the air with a righteous rage that rattled the chandeliers. Alvarez sat in the front row, cane across his lap like a judge's gavel. Priya bounced her baby on her knee, glaring daggers at the board members squirming under the spotlight. Karen tried to defend herself. Her voice cracked as she claimed, "I was only enforcing policy. I never intended harm." But her excuses drowned beneath a sea of booze. Someone shouted, "You almost killed her," another added. "And for what, a gate contract?" The sheriff's deputy overseeing the meeting raised his hand for order, but he couldn't silence the truth. The people had finally seen the monster behind the mask of bylaws. I stood and addressed them, not as a prosecutor, but as a neighbor. We all wanted peace when we moved here. But peace built on fear isn't peace, it's prison. And last night proved that a single person's obsession with control nearly cost a life. That ends now. The crowd erupted into applause, a thunderous release of years of frustration. For once, I saw unity instead of fear. The court order required 3 things: mandatory ADA compliance. The HOA had to install a 24/7 fail-open gate system with EMS override audited monthly. No exceptions, no excuses. Board restructuring, all current members suspended until a new election overseen by the county. Karen was barred from running. Restitution fines and settlements for residents wronged by fraudulent gate fees. And then there was Karen herself. The DA's office opened an investigation into obstruction and fraud. Her nephew's company folded within a week. Insurance carriers notified the HOA they would cancel coverage unless every violation was corrected immediately. But I didn't stop there. When the judge asked if I sought criminal prosecution, I paused. My instincts screamed for vengeance, but another part of me, perhaps the part my wife loved, chose differently. "Your Honor," I said, "the community has suffered enough. Justice isn't always about jail. Sometimes it's about accountability where it hurts most." So instead of prison, Karen was sentenced to 200 hours of community service at the county rehabilitation hospital. She would spend months pushing wheelchairs, fetching water for patients, and watching the kind of people she once dismissed as inconvenient. The irony was almost poetic. The woman who once complained that ambulances were too loud would now spend her days listening to the steady beep of heart monitors and the hiss of oxygen tanks. As the order was read, Karen's face crumpled. Tears rolled down her cheeks, not the crocodile tears she'd weaponized for years, but real ones raw with humiliation. The clipboard queen had become a servant. Neighbors who'd feared her for so long stood taller that night. Alvarez leaned over to me, whispering, "Justice tastes sweeter than café con leche." Priya smiled, softly rocking her baby. Even Todd the guard approached afterward, thanking me for saving him from being scapegoated. For the first time since moving into Oaks Gate, I felt the weight lift. The streets were quieter, but not in Karen's suffocating way. This quiet was peace, the kind that comes when truth finally breaks chains. At home, my wife was recovering slowly. The doctor said it was a close call, too close. When she was strong enough to speak, she squeezed my hand and whispered, "You saved me." I shook my head. "No," I told her, "you saved me. You gave me the reason to fight." And as I kissed her forehead, I knew the battle with Karen was over. But the war for dignity, for humanity, for the simple right to live without tyranny, that was only just beginning. The HOA scandal might have ended with Karen's community service, but like any rotten structure, the deeper we dug, the more decay we found. The county's audit of Oaks Gate revealed something more sinister than just arrogance. Buried in the financial records was a trail of payments, tens of thousands of dollars in emergency call-out fees, billed to the HOA every time the gate malfunctioned. Except according to maintenance logs, those malfunctions weren't accidents. They were deliberate. The scheme was simple. Karen and her nephew's security company disabled the Knox box and tampered with the gate's software on weekends, ensuring it would lock out first responders. Then, when panicked residents called for help, Karen would approve her nephew's team to repair it at inflated rates. It was extortion disguised as maintenance. And the night my wife nearly died was the moment their scheme finally collapsed. The sheriff's department launched a full investigation. Emails surfaced Karen's smug instructions to her nephew: disable the override on Fridays. More call-out revenue that way. Evidence mounted until even her last defenders abandoned her. At the next community hearing, residents didn't just demand change, they demanded blood. They voted unanimously to remove the board, dissolve all contracts tied to Karen's family, and place the HOA under outside receivership. Karen tried one last time to speak. She stood before the microphone, trembling, mascara streaking her cheeks. "I only wanted order," she pleaded. "I tried to protect our neighborhood." The room erupted with jeers. Alvarez's cane pounded like a drumbeat. Priya shouted, "Order doesn't mean control," and someone else yelled, "You protected your bank account, not us." I didn't gloat. There was no need. Watching her empire crumble in front of the very people she had terrorized was justice enough. The county receiver announced sweeping reforms: transparent budgets, ADA compliance training for all staff, a brand new gate system with direct EMS access. And for the first time, neighbors cheered at an HOA meeting. I could have stepped in. They even asked me to run for president. But I refused. "I'm not here to rule," I told them. "I'm here to remind you that communities survive when we put people before rules." When I returned home that evening, my wife was waiting for me on the porch. She was still weak, but the oxygen line was steady, her smile brighter than any badge I'd ever carried. She whispered, "It's over." I nodded. "It's over." But then she surprised me. "No," she said softly. "It's beginning." She was right. The neighborhood had changed. Where once people walked with heads down, fearful of citations, now they greeted one another with warmth. They brought meals for us, while she recovered planted flowers in Alvarez's yard, helped Priya fix her stroller wheels. It was as if the iron gate had cracked something inside all of us, not just steel but silence. Weeks later, I drove past the spot where Karen had once stood like a queen at her fortress. The gate was gone, replaced with a modern system that opened wide for emergency vehicles. I couldn't help but smile. She had tried to build a wall of power, but in the end she built a monument to her downfall. And as for Karen herself, she shuffled through her community service hours, stripped of her title, her fines, her clipboard. I saw her once at the rehab hospital while visiting my wife for a follow-up. She was pushing a patient in a wheelchair, head down, lips pressed tight. She avoided my eyes. For the first time, I almost pitied her. Almost. Because some lessons in life have to be paid in tears, and Karen's had just begun. Looking back, that night taught me something I'll never forget. Rules without compassion are cages, and power without empathy is poison. Karen believed her clipboard gave her control over people's lives, but the truth is, authority means nothing if it tramples humanity. My wife nearly lost her life because someone valued bylaws over breath. But in the end, the community learned that real order isn't found in fines or fear. It's found in neighbors standing together in compassion that overrides arrogance. We all live behind gates of some kind, rules, routines, even our own pride. But when those gates block kindness, when they shut out empathy, they're just walls that divide us. Breaking them down doesn't cause chaos. It brings us closer to the people we're supposed to be. So here's the lesson I carry. Never let rules blind you to what's right. Speak up when power is abused. And when someone needs help, don't wait for permission. Act. Humanity doesn't need approval. If this story hit you as hard as it hit me living through it, share it. Leave a comment below with your thoughts, your experiences with power gone wrong, or simply where you're tuning in from. And if you want more stories where justice meets drama, hit that subscribe button, because trust me, there are always more Karens out there.